Hello and welcome to our virtual candidate forums for the 2020 election. We are coming down to the end here. I think just 3 to go. And today's forum is a rescheduled discussion on the Children's Services Council. If you're on social media, please hit the share button and help all your friends see today's discussion. I am William Hatfield. I'm the editor of the Tallahassee Democrat, and I will be today's moderator. The League of Women Voters, our partner in these forums, is here in spirit, but we're cutting down on the number of talking heads for our viewing audience. Before we get started, because it's 2020 and anything that can go wrong will go wrong, like last week, we ask that you bear with us through any technical difficulties we may have. We've always successfully done it in the end, and that's going to happen today too. Hopefully we've already covered things, but you just never know. We're here today for a different kind of forum. Not going to say a debate because that's become a dirty word. With advocates for or against the upcoming referendum to use tax dollars to create a Children's Services Council. And we have 2 people each. On the pro side, we have Ginny Dailey, an attorney with a statewide law firm and a leading volunteer with the campaign for the CSC. She is also the wife of Mayor John Dailey, who first proposed the idea of a CSC back when he was on the county commission. We are also joined by Sheriff Walt McNeil, who has penned an op-ed supporting the CSC. We have Emily Fritz on the con side. She is the chair of the No Blank Check Coalition. And then we have Commissioner Jeremy Matlow, a Tallahassee City Commissioner who just came out against the proposal at a press conference last week. So what are we talking about today? Well, in November, on your ballot, it is in fact the very last item on the back, so don't forget it. It is called the Establishment of Children's Services Council of Leon County. It's pretty short, so I'd like to read it here so we all know what we're talking about. The ballot language says, should the Children's Services Council of Leon County be established to provide children with early learning and reading skills, development, treatment, preventative, and other children's services in Leon County as a special district with ad valorem taxing authority limited to 1/2 mil annually and independent oversight and accountability as required by law unless and until the district is dissolved as specified in statute 125-901-4A, Florida statute, yes or no? So in plain English, the CSC would be a committee of appointed folks who would work with a hired executive director to determine and distribute funding to address a wide range of issues facing children, likely including school and life, healthy children and families, and stable and nurturing families and communities. The creation of a Leon County CSC means imposing a property tax rate of up to $0.5 mil or $42 per $100,000 in taxable property value per year, representing up to $8 million per year. So here's how today's forum is going to work. This may be more of a discussion than some of the others we've had, and we're sure the panelists will be wanting to answer each other. We'll let the discussion be as organic as we can and still cover everything we need to cover, which is a lot. Wanting to keep individual answers to no more than 1.5 minutes. We'll pull out the trusty bell if I need to keep the conversation moving. It sounds like this. If you want to jump in, just put your hand up. Even if you're not on screen, someone who is off screen will see it and be able to flag me, so I'll know. Well, let's see, what else? For the audience, we're very happy to have your questions from the social media audience. You can type them into the comments, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Please keep them on the topic of the Children's Services Council. Any questions before we start? Let's do this. All right, so we're going to start by talking about the process. We're going to kind of set the table. So for our pro folks, as an introduction, tell us how this all came to be. How did the idea begin? How was the planning committee established? Who was on the committee? And what was the process for reaching your conclusions? We'll hear specifics later, but for right now, we're talking about the process. So Mrs. Dailey and Mr. Sheriff, you have the floor.
Okay.
So I'll let Ginny go ahead and describe the process, how it was formulated.
Okay,
jump in there where I can.
great. Thank you, Sheriff McNeil, and thank you to the Democrat for hosting this great format, this forum. I do have some audio feedback. I'm not sure what's happening. So where did this come from? This came from a discussion in the spring of 2018 that some community leaders brought to members of the county commission. And my husband at that time was serving on the county commission and was interested in the idea. And he and I began to do some research in these CSCs around the state, and we learned about the phenomenal success that the communities who have a CSC have. And so when we learned about that success and the success that that proven model brings to Leon County, we decided that was a great new tool in our toolbox to bring to Leon County. And so that was when the process began. I believe John brought it up at the county commission in the spring. There were a number of public hearings at that time. And then at that time, the county commission created a planning committee, which met for about 18 months and was subject to open meetings and government in the sunshine and all that. There were about 25 members of that committee, and they studied a number of questions, including what are the unmet needs in our community for children, and how does a CSC work and how it can bring success to Leon County. Sheriff McNeil sat on that committee, and God bless him, he went to every meeting and paid attention and participated, so he can answer more specifically questions about the planning committee.
Well, thank you, Jenny. Let me just jump right into the middle of this. I think the issues relative to the makeup of the committee was a cross-section of people in leadership positions in Leon County, and I think both of the cons on this, Emily, Fritz, and Jeremy spent some time looking at these issues as well as the discussion progressed throughout our community. I'm informed about the Children's Services Council in a number of ways. I go back to when they were first sort of introduced in the state of Florida. I had the opportunity to serve at one point as Secretary of the Department of Juvenile Justice for our state. And one of the things, obviously, I was looking for is to try to find delivery systems in communities that worked. And the legislature, who does not want to spend money on things that are frivolous and don't result in good outcomes, also had that same concern in terms of how dollars are spent, realizing that they're spending dollars anyway, taxpayer dollars, on various youth initiatives across the state. And we then came across Broward and Alachua. I believe it was Alachua, but forget which counties those were. But in any event, we went in, looked at what they were doing, and I was extremely impressed with the Children's Services Council and the outcomes they were receiving in those communities. They set up a process by which this group that selected through the community with the involvement of the state would then sit down and look at the issues and problems that are occurring in their communities, particularly related to children. And heretofore, in most communities like Leon County, it's sort of a hit and miss kind of proposition with respect to what works in our community. And so what we saw in those other communities that already had a Children's Services Council was that, one, they were looking at what we call evidence-based practices. That you often have in, I'll just speak to the legislature, for example, every person who has some sort of business that deals with children and think they can help come to the legislature and ask for money, saying this program will work and this program will work. And what we were able to do was to say, quite honestly, we want to see what your program actually does in terms of outcomes. And the best way we can do that at the state level is to go through those Children's Services Councils and look at the information that was being provided. And that way.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sheriff. All right. Now we're going to move on to the con side. Were adequate opportunities provided for meaningful input from the public into the planning process, and was the process transparent? Do you believe there was representation missing from the committee or in any part of the process? Commissioner Matlow and Ms. Fritz, you have the floor.
Sure, I'll go first. First off, I want to thank the Tallahassee Democrat, Mrs. Dailey and Sheriff McNeil and Emily Fritz for taking part in this conversation. It's been a long time coming. I think it's an important conversation that we need to have because, you know, our kids are important to everybody. You know, your question revolves around, was there enough community participation? And I mean, the answer to that is always, there could always be more. You know, there are people living in poverty, people who don't really get invited to political circles that I think would like to partake in these type of conversations. And for me, the ability to propose alternatives. You know, I think the city and the county have a very specific role that they should be taking in addressing some of these. And look, what the Children's Services Council is proposing is very personal. I grew up raised by a single mother of 4 kids in poverty. When we talk about food insecurity, I can tell you what it's like to see the last can of beans in the cupboard be eaten. I can tell you what it's like for, you know, my mother to tell me she's not hungry so her children can eat. Like, I get it. I know the need, and I've known the need for a long time. But when we get into this conversation, we need to think about how do we best address the need. And I think having your elected local officials take the reins and really make this a priority is the direction we need to go. Thank you.
Anything you'd like to add, Ms. Fritz?
Yes, I did attend all of the committee meetings, and I will say that they did allow at the meetings, they did allow public comment. I will say that I do not feel that and I respect everybody who served on the committees. A lot of people on the committee were friends of mine, and they're very successful, intelligent people, community leaders. So I have no issues with them per se. But the committee was definitely wasn't as balanced as it could have been. All but one of the committee members were handpicked by the Political Action Committee that supports the Children's Services Council. There was one person who was added later on at the request of a business group. A businessman in Tallahassee went to Judge Shostrom and asked him to add an individual, and the committee graciously did that. But all the other committee members were handpicked by the PAC. So I do not feel like it had the diverse opinions that it should have had. I can't hear you, Glenn.
Thank you. All right. On our pro side, what do you all think of their concerns? Ms. Dailey?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hatfield. I would say humbly, with respect to the concern that there were not, or that the committee was not balanced, I think that's a bit of a distortion of the process. The planning committee was made up of a bunch of volunteers. Everybody was volunteering their role and their time, and they were selected by the county commission. There were a number of people who volunteered as the discussion was coming before the county commission. And it was, in fact, the commissioners that selected and set in place that committee. So I think that's a bit of a misinformation to say that they were handpicked by any particular group. And as Ms. Fritz rightly pointed out, anyone who wished to be added to the committee could. We had one member who asked to be added to the committee and was added to the committee. With respect to Commissioner Matlow's comment about not having enough community conversation, I would humbly suggest that if he had attended any of those meetings, he may have seen the significant number of community members and leaders who participated. There were several of those meetings where we had standing room only participation from the nonprofits, from the service providers, and from the families in need in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Matlow, what do you think of that?
Yeah, you know, I was able to attend one of the meetings, and I did think that it was informative. to the public. But when I talk about community participation, saying we can always do better, it's just simply that we could always do better. You know, we're running into people just now who don't even know this is on the ballot, and really reaching deep into our communities, and again, engaging the people who've never shown up to a commission meeting, who don't know what the city and county commission are doing, but are really impacted by, you know, the decisions are elected. Some people call that a ground game, or, you know, just really hitting the streets, you know, door-to-door canvassing. Because I mean, again, we're all here for, I think, the same purposes. We want to see better in our community and see better outcomes. That's what this is all about, is how do we get to better outcomes? And I'm 100% committed to getting us there.
Thank you. So Mr. Matlow and Ms. Fritz, we're going to touch on statistics really quick. What are two statistics that make the case that a CSC is the wrong course at the wrong time? Mr. Matlow or Ms. Fritz?
Go ahead, Emily.
Okay. Well, Sheriff McNeil referenced the success of children's services councils across the state. And you can't see this on screen, but the University of South Florida does a Florida Child Wellbeing Index every year. And they compile numerous statistics on everything from education, health, crime, economic issues. And Leon County ranks higher than 7 of the 9 counties that have children's services councils. So therefore, there is not a lot of evidence that the children's services councils have proven results. In fact, the Pinellas County Children's Services Council has been around for 74 years, and it collects 4 times the amount of money per child than Leon County will collect. Yet Pinellas County ranks 13 slots below Leon County. So when you compile all the statistics, there's not really a lot of evidence that CSCs have been successful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Dailey, Mr. Sheriff, same question. In reverse, share a statistic or two that demonstrate the profound need for a CSC.
Well, I think I can speak to at least 2 of those. Can you all hear me? I had a lot of static on my side.
Not real well.
Yeah, there's definitely something going on with your mic, Mr. Sheriff. I don't know if you've got an internal microphone or an external microphone. You may want to try the internal mic.
Let me see if, can you hear me?
Can a little bit.
He's muted.
Can you take him off mute, Randy? Hang on, we're trying to get the sheriff to get his mic unmuted. While the sheriff's having issues on the mic side, Sheriff, you got to take your, there you go. You've taken yourself off mute. Nope, you're back on mute again. Mrs. Dailey, do you have a statistic or two that point to the profound need for a CSC?
Certainly, I would be happy to share, and I think there are a number of statistics, and I do hope that Sheriff McNeil gets the opportunity to share his thoughts. This is an area where his leadership and his expertise, statewide expertise, has been helpful. But first, I would say, with respect, Ms. Fritz's reference to the University of South Florida's Wellbeing Index for Leon County is somewhat of a distortion. Because while Leon County may be ranked higher than some of the counties that have CSCs, we are nevertheless ranked in the very middle of the state. And if you look at, and I can't remember at the moment whether it was the Annie E. Casey Foundation or the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, they looked at every state nationally, and Florida's at the bottom of the barrel. I believe we were 47 out of 48, 47 or 48 out of 50 for those children well-being indicators. And so where we are in the statewide index doesn't really, to me, look like a very strong indicator. And I think specific to Tallahassee, there are two statistics I want to share. One, we learned last year in 2019 that 1 out of 5 of children in Tallahassee are going hungry. They go hungry at night, they go hungry on the weekends, and they go hungry during the summer. We learned last year that in that community, the number for Black and brown children in our community is even worse. It's 1 in 4. Last week, I learned from Second Harvest Bank here locally that in 2020, the numbers have gotten even worse because of the pandemic, and 1 in 3 of our children are suffering from food insecurity. And so that is a startling statistic, because we can't expect our children to learn. We can't expect our children to make good behavioral decisions. They're hungry all of the time. So that's
Thank you. So Mrs. Dailey, staying with you, can you also share one anecdote or real life example that shows the need for a CSC?
Sure. I think the most disturbing story that I have learned about this summer was there's a young man, RJ Addison, who is 12 years old and was shot as a part of gun violence on our streets on Holton Street in Tallahassee. And he is now out of the hospital. He has spent much of the summer in the hospital for multiple surgeries. If we could intervene in the lives of those at-risk youth, teenagers and tweens, before they get involved in dangerous activities, we can change the trajectory of their lives. And I'll give you an example. Teresa Bishop from St. Lucie County spoke to a meeting last week, and she shared about the at-risk youth program in St. Lucie County called Ignite Youth Alliance. And since the CSC began investing in their program, the number of gun violence incidents in St. Lucie County has dropped by 70%. That is a startling success that I would love to see for Tallahassee. And think about what a change that would be for RJ and his family, having not suffered that traumatic injury this summer.
Thank you. So, Ms. Fritz and Commissioner Matlow, I'm also looking for you one anecdote or real life example that shows why the CSC is the wrong course at the wrong time.
Well, no, and I'll let Jeremy jump in if he wishes. The people, those of us who do not support the CSC, are not saying that there are not needs in this community. We absolutely do have needs. We just believe that it should be in the hands of elected officials, because they are held accountable to the public, whereas an appointed board is not. A lot of people don't realize this is a new government body, and it will be the only local government body that is not elected. We elected 100% of our city commissioners. We elect 100% of our county commissioners. We will elect 100% of the school board members, but we will not be electing this year. So that is our issue, and I think that Jeremy Matlow may want to address the issue about what Leon County, what we're doing on the St. Lucie.
First, I just start with, again, an anecdote from my personal life. I grew up on the south side of Tallahassee, and as you know, many people know, our bus system, our transportation is a challenge for people living in poverty. I can remember the closest grocery store was 2 miles away, and we had to walk 2 miles, get our groceries, and as a 6-year-old child, walk 2 miles back home. So, I mean, I say all this to say the problems facing people in poverty aren't going to be solved with an $8 million tax. It's going to take our local elected officials looking at this holistically, looking at our land use, looking at our transportation, looking where we have food deserts. These are the things that people who are struggling really want to see addressed. So, I mean, I don't want to minimize what the human services can do. I do think we need increased funding, and we should look to our city and county to address them. But when you look at anecdotes of people's lives and children who are really struggling, the need is so much greater than just a food bank. You know, food banks are fantastic when you need them and you can stand in that line. But when we look at a growing Tallahassee, you know, we look at new developments that we're pushing in the northeast of Tallahassee that are taking hundreds of millions of dollars in city resources and are going to create communities that are economically segregated.
Thank you.
Back to statistics, we're one of the most economically segregated cities in the country, and that's going to take elected local officials to address.
Mr. Matlow and Ms. Fritz, do you believe the work that needs to be accomplished can be done by the existing organizations in the county? And if you're against the creation of a CSC, what group or groups do you think should be taking the lead on children's issues?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll say I believe the city commission should. I believe the county commission should. You know, we live in a city where you know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? You know, we've seen our airport become a priority. We've seen development projects become a priority. But the city and county have 5-year strategic plans, and early childhood education listed in them. 3rd grade reading scores isn't listening to them. We are to govern our people. I think our government can't do it. I know there's a lot of distrust in government, and people think that their politicians don't care about the interest in improving the community, and they only care about, you know, personal greed or what have you. There's a lot of misinformation about there. So all I'm asking is,
Thank you.
Give your local officials a chance to do the right thing.
All right, Mrs. Dailey.
Sure, if I could respond
Sure.
in all due respect to Commissioner Matlow and the city and the county, they've had plenty of time. He's had 2 budget cycles to make changes in the city commission's budget, and the county commission has had plenty of years to make changes in their budget and make our children a priority. And they haven't done it. Commissioner Matlow hasn't done it, and the others haven't done it. That's why the CSC as a new tool in our toolbox can be a real game changer. And that's why we're proposing this CSC. I think I hear the sheriff is joining us now in his car, it looks like. But that's why. But to get to the gist of it, I think, Mr. Hatfield, what's important is if we do the same thing, then we should expect the same outcomes. If we do nothing new, then we shouldn't expect anything new. And that's why the Children's Services Council, the new tool in our toolbox, can be a real game changer for our children.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner Matlow, what do you say about the, you know, having 2 budget cycles to make a dent in this?
Yeah, I mean, we need to constantly move forward. When the new city commission came on 2 years ago, the impact of poverty became one of its top priorities. And, you know, I agree with Mrs. Dailey. The city needs to follow through on those promises. They need to put more money into these services. They need to, I mean, we have a retreat coming up in January where we can lay out these priorities, and 100% will recommend that the city commission, yes, let's continue to invest in children's services.
Thank you. Mrs. Dailey, Sheriff, you know, you met with many existing groups and kind of the research of all this. I mean, why did you come away convinced that the groups in and of themselves can't accomplish the job, that the stakeholders can't accomplish the job on their own?
Well, if I can speak to that, I apologize. I had to jump out and get in my
Sheriff,
car.
you sound great.
You sound so good.
Some reason Democrat can't get into my house for some reason, but let me tell you that first and foremost, everybody's been trying to do their best in our community. Fact of the matter is that the Children's Services Council steps into a void that has existed in our community for many, many years, specifically to deal with children's issues and to put some expertise at the table to talk about these issues. Quite honestly, I'll be honest with you, sometimes these issues become politicized in a political process. There are winners and losers when you go into a political process. And in some cases, politicians decide to split the baby. That is, everybody that comes before the city or county commissions gets something. What we're saying with the Children's Services Council is simply this. Those practices in our community that are outcome-based, they are systems that have been proved to work, and they are best practices. And those are the ones we're asking that those committees fund. And I think, quite honestly, it takes a lot of burden off the politicians to have citizens. Now, Commissioner Matlow, you talked about you were in favor of a commission looking at law enforcement. Well, you certainly should be in favor of a commission looking at our children's issues in this community, because those are much more important and impactful in terms of driving down crime in this community. If we put these councils together focused on our children's issues, kindergarten, up to third grade reading levels, those are going unaddressed by county or city commissions. We leave that to the school board. What this council does is bring all those entities together in a way that specifically goes at trying to drive down the crime issues and the poverty issues in our community. And this issue, quite honestly, has been going on for decades.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Matlow, in addition, if there's anything you want to respond, or Ms. Fritz, I'm also interested, one of the major complaints we've heard is that the CSC will essentially be controlled by the governor, in that 5 out of 10 appointees answered him. But is that a legitimate concern if the county commission provides the list of people for the governor to pick from? Ms. Fritz?
William, I believe that's just, what for me, all right.
Yeah, we're starting with with Ms. Fritz and.
The issue is the fact that it is appointed, that the committee will be appointed, not elected. And when an individual is elected, as Sheriff McNeil and Commissioner Matlow know very well, they're accountable to the voters. They are being watched all the time and vote, and they have to make sure they spend the money wisely and produce results. This is an appointed committee, and if the public doesn't like how the decisions they make, they cannot vote these people out of office. And Sheriff McNeil said that the CSC will take politics out of the human services. Actually, I think it will make it worse. This Children's Services Council has already been very political, as we already know, and the appointment of these people will be very political. It will be very political when the county commission decides on who to appoint, and then when the list goes to the governor, the politics starts all over. If it's an elected people, every voter gets a voice.
Mrs. Dailey, I see your hand raised. Oh, she's muted. You got yourself muted. There you go.
Okay. My mistake. Thank you. Well, thank you. I disagree with Ms. Fritz, because I think that the proven model in the other counties shows that that's not how this operates. And I think our community is strong, and I think our community is going to follow the process. And the process calls for our county commission to select the citizen members of the committee. And we have 4 elected members who are directly elected by the people of the council. Unlike what Ms. Fritz said, at any time, if the voters of Leon County are dissatisfied with this Children's Services Council, they can go to the county commission and have it put on the ballot to be dissolved. Now, it's interesting, in all of the counties who have created a Children's Services Council, they have never been resolved. In fact, they have been renewed by the public, by the voters, with enormous positive margins.
Thank you. Commissioner Matlow, I saw you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, William. I wanted to actually say that the governor actually ends up with essentially 6 appointments, because he also, a state appointee from DCF goes on to the board. So look, I'm a firm believer in that local tax dollars belong to local people, and local decisions should be the driving force between who spends them. I get stopped all the time in Publix about a local decision. It may be a city decision, it may be a county decision, but your everyday person, they don't know the inner workings of government and what's a city commission, what's a county commission decision. And now we're going to add a children's services commission that really we want to be able to respond to. You know, I mean, the governor, I don't think I would pick the same people that the governor would pick. I don't think local people would pick the same people that the governor would pick, which makes you, if you take a step back, the way this council is set up, we can do the exact same thing under local control, answering to local budgets.
And so you're not comfortable that the list that would be provided to the governor, it still enables the governor to basically exert his will on it?
Yeah, you know, I'll be frank. I don't think the governor uses the state budget enough to address children's services, and I don't need his hands in local tax dollars exercising his will.
Thank you. Mrs. Dailey.
Well, I'd like to defer to Sheriff McNeil. I saw him trying to get a word in earlier,
Great.
so I'll give him a turn.
Well, thank you. You know, I totally disagree with the assertion about the governor interfering in our local process. I think William, you laid it out. You talked about the fact that these are persons that the county and city commission would be selecting and submitting to the governor. I mean, I don't know what else you want to do. I guess the assumption is that the governor is going to discard all those folks and pick his own. That's never happened anywhere. I think, quite honestly, we're looking for reasons why we shouldn't do this, as opposed to trying to figure out the way, how can we solve these problems we've got in our community. And the first real actionable item to come before some folks like Ms. Fritz and Commissioner is to go out and say it isn't a way to go. Now, I'll ask the question, what have you done? What have you all done in your capacity as commissioners or city commissioners or county commissioners over the last decade to deal with these issues? And I believe this is dollars well spent. And I believe the taxpayers will vote for it because they see what's taking place in our community, particularly the impact on the African-American community and the impact on businesses, because the business folks don't get the benefit of having those resources that are here. And I talk to them all the time. They're trying to find people to do the work in our community, and they can't find it. And they're having those impacts.
So let's talk briefly about the money. I mean, how much will this program cost taxpayers, and discuss how much it will on average cost homeowners, renters, and businesses? We'll start with Mrs. Dailey and Mr. Sheriff.
Okay, I'm happy to address that. I believe you already mentioned it in your opening comments, Mr. Hatfield. The Children's Services Council will be authorized for up to $500,000. What that means in real life for real people is about $42 per year per $100,000 in taxable value. So that means you have to set aside homestead exemption and veterans exemptions and all the other exemptions. But that's what it will cost per year, and it is expected to generate about between $7 and $8 million. We'll know more as we get closer. And certainly those numbers were prepared before the pandemic, and so the numbers may be slightly less. But let me put that number in perspective for you. In the local community, the city, the county, and the United Way are the largest individual funders of human services in our community. Combined, those, and I'm talking about locally driven dollars that are only spent locally. Combined, those three sources are $6 million a year. If we inject new money of $7 to $8 million per year into the community, it will be a game changer. It is big enough to be changing the lives of our community.
Thank you. Commissioner Matlow, Ms. Fritz, I'd love to get a reaction on that, along with the idea of, you know, if that's what it boils down to each person, you know, is that a bank-breaking proposition? And also, specifically for you, Commissioner Matlow, you know, you've talked about city leaders being able to do this. As an example, where in the city budget would this money come from to be able to deal with these kinds of issues?
Sure, yeah. And first, when we talk about what it's going to cost people, we're in the middle of an economic recession. These are unprecedented times, and what this council will do 100% is going to raise rents It's going to raise mortgage payments, and it's going to raise rents on our small businesses. The county is currently using CARES Act dollars to inject capital directly to people who need it most. I mean, we'd essentially be putting money in their front pocket and taking it out of their back pocket. So, I mean, when we look at the time frame we're in, it just seems to be at a time where we have to say, we're not at a time where we can raise taxes on people, but we are at a time where we can re-examine our budgeting priorities.
And then how about where the money could come from in the city budget?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, the city budget is nearly $900 million when you include capital improvement projects. And again, the priorities that we've put forth on things like the airport at the city, the priorities that Blueprint sales tax dollars are going to, they're going to pet projects like a convention center that costs $30 million. You know how many early education facilities, what top caliber facility you could build with $30 million? So when we go back and we look at our priorities, again, if we stop prioritizing pet projects and developers and really projects that cater to the wealthy and really start catering our projects to the people most in need, we have more than enough money within our current budgets to address all of the issues that have been raised so far.
Thank you. Ms. Dailey, I see you raising your hand. I'm also interested in, we've got a lot of comments coming in from Facebook. So many of them can kind of being boiled down to this idea. Why should we vote yes if the committee won't tell us specifically how the money will be spent? So you can absolutely reply, but if you can also touch on that.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, Commissioner Matlow, with due respect, you've had 2 budget cycles to find money in the city budget. You didn't answer Mr. Hatfield's question about where that $8 million per year would come from, and you haven't done that in the 2 budget cycles that you've been involved in and voted on. Secondly, to refer to capital improvement dollars as potential funding for human services is somewhat disingenuous. Those dollars can't be used for those purposes. And so I think that that's misinformation and unfair to the public. Now, going back to your question, Mr. Hatfield, with respect to what the dollars will be used for, I will tell you the committee spent 18 months and they came up with 3 priority areas. Those 3 priority areas are to help our children learn, to be healthy, and to be safe. Where exactly those dollars are going to go and how, which entities will get them and which programs will and won't be funded, we won't know until the council is established and seated and make those decisions. But we've really got the ball rolling because of the planning committee's work to identify the clear needs and priorities of our community.
Thank you.
Sheriff McNeil served on that committee, so I really should defer to him on that.
Okay, well, we're going to go to Ms. Fritz really quickly and then to Mr. Sheriff.
Okay. I wanted to backtrack a second. When you were asking what this will actually cost people, $500,000 on $100,000 taxable value is $50. I wasn't a math major, but that I do know. The average house in Leon County is about $200,000. So if it's homesteaded, it will cost the person around $75 or $80. If it's not, it'll be $100. I've looked on the property appraiser and tax collectors websites. There are some apartment complexes in Tallahassee that will have to pay $10,000 to absorb this tax. And I do not think that the managers of those apartments can absorb that without raising rent.
Thank you.
There's another thing I wanted to say to respond to what Ms. Dailey said about dissolution of the Children's Services Council. It's not that easy to put it back on the ballot to dissolve it. In order for it to go back on the ballot, the county commission has to absorb all of the liabilities that the Children's Services Council occurs. So if the Children's Services Council has signed leases on buildings or an employment contract to pay the executive director $200,000 a year, the county commission would have to absorb all of their liabilities.
Mr. Sheriff, I know you wanted to chime in, and then we'll go back to you, Mrs. Dailey, for the next question, and you can respond then too.
Thank you, William. The issue of where the money's come from, I think this is a two-edged kind of issue. One, if you listen to Commissioner Matlow and you listen to Proctor, Commissioner Proctor, we're probably talking about getting back to defund the police. When you start looking at budgets, where does the dollars come from? I think you'll have people like Commissioner Matlow looking at law enforcement and saying, because these are social service programs I believe in, and I think everybody believes in, but how do we fund them? And that's why the Children's Services Council is so important, that it allows us to utilize the dollars in a much more effective way than this note that that Commissioner Matlow never really answered, which is going back and looking at those budgets and saying, how can we take monies from this place to more effectively deal with the front end of this problem? And it is the front end of this problem because most of these children that we're talking about have issues in terms of kindergarten and ready for school at the third grade reading level. And those are the persons that are more likely to come into our criminal justice system. And that's why it's so important, again, that we get in front of this. And I don't believe we need to start looking at budgets and defunding the police, but looking at how we can do this.
Commissioner Matlow, what do you have to say about the idea that this money might come from defunding the police? And then Mrs. Dailey, we're going to get back to you. And
yeah, first I think, there's a process that the city uses and depending how it identifies funding and where it's and a lot of times we'll look to committees and citizens groups to help us come up with those decisions. Something I proposed last year was setting up a committee to essentially do exactly this, address poverty issues and come up with recommendations within the city budget. Look, I'm not the administrator of the city government, but I do know when we task our staff with doing something, they do an exceptional job every time. We had to look for cuts because of COVID. Our budget decreased, and that was challenging for them. But they're talented; they can find money in the right places. And we actually, every year, essentially, we do a tax increase when we hold the millage rate the same because it ends up collecting additional dollars. So what I'm saying is, let's look at every penny. Let's look at every department. If we have to ask them to reduce their budget by 1%, if we have to look across the board at every single city department, we could find $8 million. We could probably find more than that. But again, we need to look at our major infrastructure.
Mrs. Dailey, we're coming back to you. I also want to, I know you raised your hand. I also want to talk a little bit about, Ms. Fritz brought up an executive director. I'd love to hear how an executive director fits into this. What would be his or her job? What would be the salary of that individual?
Well, I'm sorry.
Well, that's a good question. Certainly, some of the opponents of the project have raised all sorts of scary numbers and terrible numbers from other parts of the county. But I think the experience in Tallahassee is that executive directors of nonprofit organizations, even very big ones, don't make that much money. They don't make a huge amount of money, but they get paid to do the professional services that are needed to run an administration that is spending $8 million a year. And so what the executive director's role would be, or however the CSC decides to staff it, the staffing role would be to make sure they follow all of the rules, that they audit the dollars that are being spent, and that the processes they use are open, transparent, and accountable to the people. So I think those are very important services that should be built into this process.
Thank you. The other side, what do you all think about this executive director position? Is that something that you all have concerns about?
Well, Jeremy, do you want to take it? Or do you want me? I mean,
yeah, I'll say. I mean, outside of the executive director, I mean, it's an entire new government entity being created. So when we look at budgets, we see they have communications directors, they have IT departments. They have all these things that the city of Tallahassee already has. We can consolidate our resources and let our city government take the lead. And then we don't have to recreate the wheel. We don't have to recreate. We have office space. We can supply so much of this. And then the end result is that many more dollars going directly to children's services. I know Emily may know more about the individual executive directors, and I'll let her.
Yeah. The Miami executive director makes $305. His total compensation package is $305,000. The Palm Beach County executive director's compensation package is over $250,000. Now, I did look at counties that were similar in size to Leon. Martin County is a little bit smaller. Their budget is about a little around $7 million, a little bit less. So that is closer to Leon. That executive director's compensation package is $145,000.
Thank you.
That is a high salary for Tallahassee.
Mrs. Dailey?
Yes, I just want to add, and this is something perhaps Commissioner Matlow doesn't know because it was a subject that was really studied by the Planning Committee, but Ms. Fritz has certainly heard these discussions. The CSCs in other counties have a variety of administrative structures and formats. And so some of them have their own space. Some of them use city government space or county government space or United Way space. Or other nonprofit space. And so there's a lot of different options, and the Planning Committee included in their report a variety of recommendations that would be a good fit for Tallahassee. So I think that that's helpful to focus just on Tallahassee.
All right. So this is actually, I've got a question that I want to on. We are obviously in the middle of a national discussion on race and equity, and I'm interested how that has informed your opinion on this issue. Commissioner?
Who did you say, sorry?
Commissioner Matlow?
The question is on how race and equity as a form of position on this issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the driving factors. You know, we look at our community, we're not just economically segregated, a lot of our neighborhoods are racially segregated, and we see a lot of our communities of color are living in the most extreme poverty. We've seen that one, the 304 zip code has been named one of the most impoverished zip codes in the state. So what I'm saying is that needs to be our focus. We need 100% focus on that, and it needs to come from our city and our county government, because when we focus on bringing up all communities, when we focus on proper investment, you know, when we talk about neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks, we talk about communities that don't have access to a grocery store. We talk about communities that don't have access to early childhood education. These are all things we're not going to solve with $8 million being divvied up between a myriad of different issues. We need a laser focus on the communities that are suffering the most, and we need to provide real solutions that can actually move the needle of poverty in our community.
Thank you. Sheriff McNeil, same question.
Yeah, thank you, William. In fact, I have just the opposite perspective on this. Particularly as it relates to the African American community, with the dollars that the county and city has spent trying to deal with all the issues of our community. What has continuously gone lacking is a focus on the African American kids who are coming to school not ready for school, and the city of Nordic County is prepared to do that. And what the Children's Services Council does, in my opinion, is to lazily focus, and that's one of the outcomes, the three outcomes we're looking for, is to lazily focus on those communities. And again, the African American community is one of those major communities that has gone unaddressed, and the Children's Services Council is going to step in and start to move that needle in the right direction. I haven't seen anybody, city or county, take on that initiative over these last decades that I've been in. 40 years I've been here, and not seen the effort until now to address these concerns, particularly, again, in the African American community.
Thank you. Mrs. Fritz, same question. Ms. Fritz, same question.
Okay, could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. We're obviously in the middle of a national discussion on race and equity. How has that informed your opinion on this issue?
You know, I don't, obviously there are numerous that we are aware of the fact that there are low-income people in the African American community. There are also low-income people of all races. So I believe that as community leaders, we need to look at everybody in Leon County, including everybody of every race, ethnic group, religion, and provide the services to them that they need. I do not think that any one group should be overlooked. So I do believe that services should be provided to people who need them if there is a need there.
Thank
regardless
you.
of race.
Mrs. Dailey, same question.
Sure, but I'll defer to Sheriff McNeil. He wanted to respond.
Yeah, let me just
Oh, okay.
first make it clear that the Children's Services Council will respond to the entire community. The difference is that it's focused on children's issues, and African American kids show up disproportionately in terms of reading levels and in poverty. And because we're focused on children, the outcome of that, just statistically, means that more African American kids will receive these services. All the kids will receive them, but the African American kids are disproportionately represented, which means they are going to receive more of the care.
Okay.
Mr. Hatfield, if I
Yes.
could personally
Sure.
respond, I just want to echo Sheriff McNeil's comments, but I also, look, I'm a white lady from the north side of town in Tallahassee. I can't speak for the African American community, neither can Miss Fritz or Mr. Matlow. But what I can say is, in this moment of racial equity and reckoning in our community nationally, Tallahassee has an opportunity to open our eyes, recognize the problems, and take a step forward towards a solution. And so I would echo Commissioner Matlow's words. This is a laser-focused, game-changing solution that can bring real solutions. It won't fix everything for everybody. It will not fix all poverty in all parts of Leon County, but we will begin to move the needle. And I can't ask for anything more than that. I would rather do something a little bit at a time and move the needle than do nothing.
Another question we're getting a lot of on Facebook is talking about procurement procedures and controls relating to this money. I mean, on the opponent side, we have the blank check committee. Can you tell us why this isn't a blank check?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So there won't be any blank check. The way the process works, the statute requires the money to be assigned. So let me just explain in plain English how the process really works. Once the voters approve this, the council gets seated, and then the council has to conduct a needs assessment. And out of that needs assessment, they're going to pick a priority, 1 or 2 or 3 priorities for funding. And they're then going to accept applications for funding that move the needle for those priorities. And so then there won't be any blank check given. There will be approved funding applications. And so when an organization comes and says, we can move the needle on at-risk teenagers by putting them in jobs, paid internships after school, and here's what we're going to do, here's where we're going to spend the money, and here are the outcomes we can promise you, that's where the money will go. And then the Children's Services Council will follow up to make sure they audit the organizations and they monitor and issue reports on where those dollars are spent and whether they are producing the outcomes that were promised.
Thank you. Commissioner Matlow and Ms. Fritz, question. I mean, what kind of, if this passes, what kind of procurement procedures would you like to see in place to ensure that some of your concerns don't become a reality?
Well, the procurement,
Oh, sure.
they're saying it's going to be competitively bid. That's what was discussed in the planning committee meetings. I'm not sure the nonprofits are aware of the fact that it's competitively bid. Another thing that's important is the contracts need to make sure that the outcome measures have to be documented, and perhaps even a clawback provision if the outcomes are not met. It's real easy for me to say, oh, I can do this and I can do that. And then if I don't do it, say, oh, you gave me $100,000 and I didn't get it done, so I'm sorry. But if there's a clawback provision in the contracts, there should be that would create more accountability. But again, we don't need to create a new branch of government to do this. And I see if Commissioner Matlow wants to add anything to what I said, since he deals with procurement more than I do.
Yeah, sure. What I think voters want to know is just that if they're going to be taxed, how's that money going to be spent? You know, we've talked about food insecurity, we've talked about child abuse, we talked about mental health care, we talked about early childhood education. How does that money get divvied up? What goes to food insecurity? We have tens of thousands of hungry kids in our community. You know, when $8 million may, feed them for a couple of months. It can't. It's not a silver bullet that's really going to solve our problems. But what voters want is when they're unhappy with how money is being spent, they have some sort of recourse. And I don't think going to your county government, petitioning them to put it back on the ballot, having it go to referendum, and then being stuck with the liabilities is the type of recourse they're looking for. They want our government. Governments get criticized for not being agile and being able to be nimble and address needs directly. But this is way more cumbersome than what our city and county governments are able to do. So I hear what the proponents are saying, and I 100% agree with the needs that you're advocating for. And I would just hope that if this tax doesn't pass, we still come back to the table and address issues. Just publicly, I've seen the majority of the city commission seem to support funding children's services. So I think if we can't get it done on this ballot referendum with appointees by the governor and all of this confusion that's been created by this council, we should be able to get it done directly.
Thank you. Ms. Dailey, any thoughts on that? I also, I'd like to know where and when can the public see a budget of what's going to be done with that $8 million?
Sure. Well, let me answer that question first, and then I can respond to some of Commissioner Matlow's statements. The way the process works, the statute lays out the process, and it puts it in place. And look, because we are in Tallahassee, we don't borrow anything, information or advice from Alachua County and Gainesville. We're big Seminole fans here, but Alachua County is the county that most recently adopted a Children's Services Council in 2018. And so I know a lot of us have been watching the Alachua County process as they have put their council in place, as they have seated their council members, and as they have started the process of issuing funding. And so I think we can learn a lot from that council. And the time frame is, it will take about a year before there's any money to be issued by the Children's Services Council, because that's about 12 to 18 months is what it takes to seat the council and get them going. And then what happens is the council has to produce, it's almost exactly like the city or county budgeting process. They have to produce a budget, and then they have to produce a proposal of how they're going to spend it. That is all subject to public review. All of their meetings will be open to the public. All of their proposals will be subject to public review. So it's very similar, frankly, to the city and the county. But going back to something that Commissioner Matlow said, I think the important point here is it is theoretically possible that the city or county or both could get together and solve these problems and dedicate money. That is theoretically possible, but it hadn't happened yet. And we've been waiting and waiting, and there have been plenty of opportunities. And so now we have a real opportunity on the table to move the needle for children now. So we want to take this opportunity and create this new tool for our community.
Thank you. Commissioner Matlow, I'll let you respond to that. But also, they say that politics makes for strange bedfellows. As we can see today, we have a Republican budget hawk teamed up with an who's been called an ultra progressive. What made the two of you and the people you represent decide to work together on this? And has the common ground you found on this issue led you to any other interesting discussions?
Yeah, I think overall, I just think we both think that our children deserve better than a council like this, and to really have it be a focal issue. But I want to go back to the city and county commission haven't done it yet. Our city leaders are finally catching up to the need. This is something people living in poverty have known for decades. But you might remember 5 years ago, the Chamber of Commerce petitioned a study to disprove that economic segregation in Tallahassee was a thing. So we moved so much in the last 5 years that's progress. And this city commission is progressing, and we are starting to take notice of these issues, and our whole community is taking notice of these issues. And that's a very important distinction from the past and the future to note. As for working with Republicans, look, I ran for office to represent everybody. I'm a small business owner. I understand how a property tax increase affects small and medium-sized businesses. ones that are struggling during this pandemic right now. I've rented property. I've rented student property. I understand that landlords don't absorb that type of hit to their budget, especially in the middle of a pandemic. I understand that those costs are going to be passed directly to people's rents. And look, let's be honest, landlords don't raise rents $5 at a time. So it may go up 10, it may go up 15, it may go up $25. That's going to be real hard for a lot of people who are struggling to overcome, especially during the crisis we're in. So it's just not the time to raise taxes. This is
Ms. Fritz, same question. Talk about kind of the common ground and the political reality of where you find yourself.
Okay, well, first of all, I met Commissioner Matlow in 2018 when we were both running for office. He had a better outcome than I did, but I got to know him then and always liked him. We were at a lot of the same events, and we had a lot of discussions then. And it is not unusual. I don't draw any one party line on anything. I'll look at things, the facts, and analyze them, and I will talk with anybody who has an interest in the subject. And I have found that a lot of my liberal friends agree with me on this issue. A lot of them, because I found a lot of them are concerned about creating a brand new branch of government that they don't get to elect. And a lot of them are very concerned about the lack of accountability and how the money's going to be spent. And I do, so I'm friends with all sorts of people, so.
Mrs. Dailey, same question. I know you raised your hand and you can certainly respond, but I'm also interested in what are your thoughts on this, seemingly like bipartisan opposition?
Well, I think there is very strong and wide and diverse bipartisan support for this ballot initiative for the Children's Services Council. I applaud Sheriff McNeil's long passion and commitment to this, as well as a number of our county commissioners, city commissioners, and school board members, and a ton of our community leaders. When you consider, I think we have to look at perhaps Commissioner Matlow as representing a fairly extreme edge of the community's opinion, and Miss Fritz also representing on the opposite end a more extreme version of public opinion, because when you look at the more moderate and more numerous members of our public, those organizations are using their voice to support this initiative. Every one of our local chambers of commerce has voted to endorse this initiative. That hadn't happened almost ever. So that's a huge step forward for our community. And it demonstrates that these folks, even conservative business owners, believe that this is a worthwhile investment in our community. And that's important.
Mr. Sheriff, any thoughts on the, kind of political, makeup of this issue?
Well, quite honestly, William, I have not seen the issues. That's from my perspective. I've talked to people who are conservative, liberal, and all across the spectrum. We've gotten support for this initiative. They see the value, and quite honestly, they see this as I talk to the chamber, for example, they see this as a jobs issue and a resource issue in our community. And I'm not, people label us as liberals and conservative. I'm not a liberal. I'm a fiscal conservative. So I don't always go one way or the other. I make my decisions. And I think most people in this community make their decisions up based on the value of the issues in front of them. How does it improve the quality of life of Leon County is what I look at. And I think most of us do. And that's why I'm so hopeful that this Children's Services Council will pass.
Thank you. Mr. Matlow and Ms. Fritz, I want to let you respond in terms of the, whether this is an extreme view, but also, we've talked about the endorsements of the chambers. Why haven't, supporters on your side been able to convince the chambers that this is bad for business?
I wish that the chamber had invited our side to speak to them when when they voted on endorsing it. We would have certainly loved to have the opportunity to speak to them. I was a bit surprised when I got an email that the chamber had endorsed it. I wish we had been invited to make a presentation there. As far as the issue about businesses, I know a lot of business owners, and I don't know a single business owner who is voting for this. They are very concerned about it because it's going to raise the cost of doing business, and they are going to have to raise the prices of their goods and services to the people who do business with them. And they don't want to do that, but they're going to be forced to do that. And and I don't think I'm going to respond to Jenny's comment about extremism because I'm not.
Thank you. Commissioner Matlow.
Yeah, look, everyday people across our community are looking at their own personal budgets and really figuring out how to get through the next year. There's nothing radical to say, their vote matters and they should be able to make this decision directly. And there's nothing radical about saying public local dollars should be spent by public local officials that are accountable on the ballots, every 2 to 4 years. People want to interact with their government. They want to engage and they want their government to stand up for their best interests. We talk about the past. I think, largely people think that some of our past officials haven't looked after our best interests. That's why we've been seeing so much activity in our local elections, and people just want their officials to do the right thing and lead with the best foot forward. I think we're hearing from across our community, from our Republicans, our Democrats, our radical Republicans, and our radical Democrats, that, hey, our children matter. We need to figure out how to address these issues directly, but they want to be at the table. They want their elected officials to be at the table, and they want our community to come together and really focus on this issue so we can make a real difference that we can be proud of for our children and our
so I promise we're getting to the end here. I know we're in overtime. We kind of had the false start. So we're almost done. Last question. It is obviously easy to just say no. Everyone, though, has admitted that this is something that's really needed for our kids, that the concept, that the focus is really important. I'm interested, Mr. Commissioner and Ms. Fritz, if you don't like this plan, what is your specific plan? How do we deal with the needs of the children in our community? And I'm looking for as specific as you can get me that, this time, in the commission cycle, the budget will be different, or what alternative sources of funding, all of that. Mr. Commissioner, we'll start with you.
Yeah, first, there's been so much engagement of our community on issues just like this. I think, last year we saw the summits on poverty with a recommendation that I actually brought to the last commission meeting to say that the city should engage with all of our community stakeholders. We should set up a roundtable with our city, our county, our university partners, the sheriff, everybody, and come to the table and see how we can uniquely address these issues from our individual roles. So I would be happy to see the city commission support that initiative and have our community represented there. But I'd also look internally at our own budgeting. Let's set up a committee. Let's bring people from all sides of our community together, set up a group, and identify dollars that can be spent to directly impact these services. And then let's go back to the table on our large infrastructure investments and see how we can impact early childhood education with physical infrastructure where students can go and learn. So much about growing up in poverty and being a kid that struggles is not having that place to go, that place that's not your house, where there's a responsible adult that can guide you the right way, where you can find a hot meal. We have the ability to do that directly with tax dollars that we already have. So what I'm looking for is more support in the city and county governments to not say we need a separate government to put our children first. We need our government to put our kids first.
Thank you. Thank you. Any thoughts on that as well? Ms. Fritz, any thoughts on that as well?
I just wanted to say that I do think the CHSP process can be improved. I have been on the Citizen Review Committee for the CHSP process, and I'm not saying it's bad, but there's certainly some improvements. And also, again, the contracting process and the monitoring after the fact. There certainly needs to be some monitoring there. Also, I think a lot of people may not realize that in a couple of years, there is going to be a fairly substantial pot of money available when the county stops making payments to the Community Redevelopment Agency for the downtown CRA. That's going to be close to $2 million a year that will be available soon. So there are pots of money out there that can be utilized.
Thank you. Mrs. Dailey, Mr. Sheriff, and what are your thoughts of the kind of that broad plan?
Well, respectfully, I didn't hear a plan, Mr. Hatfield. Respectfully, I heard a roundtable. I heard engagement and dialogue and looking at future potential pots of money. And that just sounds like more do nothing solutions that aren't going to move the needle for today's children. We have children who are in 3rd grade today, right now, who can't read. Those children need help today, right now, as soon as possible. They don't need engagement. They don't need dialogue. They don't need a roundtable. They need help. And so we're bringing a solution. It may not be perfect, but it will move the needle. And that's what we're asking folks to support.
Thank you. Mr. Sheriff, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I will just echo again what I've already said. I've talked to business people in our community. In fact, they've sought me out and they support this initiative. What they talk to me about is we need a stable workforce in Leon County, and many of those businesses don't have that stable workforce. The outside impact of that is when you don't have that workforce, some of these kids are involved in crime. So it's the old commercial that says, pay me now or pay me later. The outgrowth of that is going to be a lot more costly, not only to our business community, but also to our citizens in general. And that's why, from my perspective, this really is a step in the right direction. And as was already stated, there's no plan for the city or county. In fact, most of the folks in the city and the county are counting on us bringing this to fruition so we can put the dollars in the right place.
Thank you. All right, we have come to closing. So this is how we're going to do it. I want to give each of you a 1.5 minutes max. I'm going to break out my trusty bell because we are overtime. But you each have a minute. I'm going to start. We're going to do back and forth to give each side kind of an airing. Commissioner, I'm going to go just in order of what I'm seeing. Commissioner Matlow.
Yeah, first off, the most nimble government you have to address these issues directly, to address the need now, is your local city and county officials. As it's been stated in this forum, nothing the planning committee has done will have to be adopted by the Children's Services Council. We just don't know what they will do. We don't know who they are. We don't know who the governor will pick. So they might agree with the recommendations. They might not. But our city and county government, they could hit the ground running right now. They can start allocating dollars right now to the issues that we've known have been around for decades. They won't have to take the whole next year planning again and buying office space and all those sorts of things to create a new agency before they can even start making an impact. So I would just, ask our community if a structure that they don't really quite understand how it's going to get appointed. They don't really quite understand how it's going to be held accountable. They really don't understand how the money is going to be spent. Do they want to raise their taxes in the middle of a pandemic while they're struggling? And, the people I talk to are saying, no, that's not what we want to do. But that we do want our city and county government to care more about our children than they do about pet projects like a convention center, more about our children, early education, than they do about subsidizing private developments in the Northeast, which are going to further strain our economic divide. They want real solutions. And that's why we get elected at the city and county level, is to provide those solutions. We don't need to create a new government, but we need to do the right thing because our children do deserve better.
Thank you. Mr. Sheriff, you've got the next closing.
Well, thank you again, William. From my perspective, the Children's Services Council is an absolute must. We have seen, as Commissioner Matlow just talked about, decades of nothing being done. For the first time, we have a plan in place that will, in fact, work. And I started when I started as sheriff 4 years ago. One of the things I said was we needed a community that was together in every way in terms of how we drive down crime in our community. And what I envision is exactly what's happening right now. Citizens coming together with our elected officials, putting together a plan by which we can start dealing with these crime problems on the front end so that they don't manifest themselves year after year. And I think we're moving in the right direction. I think to take this off the table and not realize that this is a financially sound circumstance in which we can, at the end of the day, we're actually going to save businesses and taxpayer dollars in terms of not spending so much dollars, not in a defund-me police perspective, Mr. Matlow, but in a operational perspective where we're putting the resources where they should be so that we can have the better outcomes in decades to come. And so I'm excited about this, and I hope the citizens are as well. I think this moves the needle to the point where we can start seeing crime going down in our community in a real way.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Fritz, you're up next.
Okay, thank you. As I've said before, this Children's Services Council is a blank check. There is no budget, no benchmarks, no outcomes measurement plan. The report doesn't say how the money will be spent or how they will meet all of these lofty goals. This is taxation without representation. It is very confusing to me that anybody would consider creating a new government body that you don't get to elect the leaders. As I said earlier, we elect the leaders of the City Commission, County Commission, and School Board. The leaders of this group will not be elected. And if we don't like how they spend our money, we are stuck for 12 years. They are not accountable to the voters. And I know myself, because I have spoken with city and county commissioners many times. If I don't like what they do, I tell them, and I will also often tell them in advance of a vote. But in this case, they're not accountable. Leon County does rank number 16 on the Child Welfare Index. If you look at how some of the other Children's Services Councils rank, one of them ranks 59 out of 67. One of them ranks 44, 37, 29, 28. Only 2 of them rank higher than Leon County. Children's Services Councils do not have a successful track record. We can do everything a Children's Services Council can do without a new bureaucracy. And thank you very much.
All right, Mrs. Dailey, you get to take us out.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hatfield. And thank you so much to the Democrat for hosting this forum and all of the events that you've had this election season. It's very valuable to our civil dialogue to educate our voters. And thank you for anybody who is listening and participating on Facebook. I appreciate you paying attention to your ballot and your voice. I think the Children's Services Council is important and needed for our community for 2 reasons. One, the needs of our children are undeniable. Even the project opponents agree. The statistics and outcomes of our children in Leon County today are not acceptable. The second reason is we've got to try something new. If we keep doing what we've been doing, we're going to keep getting what we've been getting, the existing outcomes. And so the Children's Services Council is a proven model, data-driven with evidence-based outcomes that we can use from other counties that will bring that success to our community. So we want to add a new tool to our community toolbox, and really that can be a game changer for our children and our families. It may not be perfect and it may not solve everything right away, but it has the opportunity to really move the needle. And we haven't heard anything from project opponents with any other better option.
Thank you. All right, we did it. I want to thank our panel members. I want to thank our audience for joining today. I want to thank our sheriff for going to his office for the forum. We have 1 or 2 forums left. We're trying to lock in our congressional candidates and have run into a little bit of logistical issues, but we're hoping that's going to be locked in tomorrow at 1 p.m. We do have locked in a forum on Thursday at 1 p.m. with the candidates for Leon County Circuit Judge, Tiffany Baker and Amanda Wall. You will be able to find a replay of this discussion as well as all of our election coverage at tallahassee.com/elections. On the top of our page, you will find our ultimate election guide, which will include many stories about this issue, as well as coverage of the races, the candidates, interviews with the candidates, more forums like this one with the candidates. You can also check out the League of Women Voters website at lwv.org/election/vote411. And that is what we got. Have a great day. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you much.